Hey guys, Eclipse14 here, and welcome to the fourth part of my PlayStation collection, consisting of the next 17 games. In this case, we've got mostly Capcom, some Konami, and a couple oddball games out in the running, which will seeg into the fifth and final part. Now, last episode took quite a bit of time to actually edit and everything, and it ended up exceeding over half an hour, so the uploading time was a pain in the ass. Hopefully it won't be that big an issue this time around. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and let's quickly get into this. So we're going to start off with Capcom because I covered a couple Capcom games in a previous video, although those were actually fighting games. So these are the ones that actually aren't related to the fighting game genre. And what better way to start than the mascot of Capcom, that is Mega Man 8. In this particular instance, Mega Man 8 had a number of different varieties that appeared. There's the Anniversary Edition, the Anniversary Collector's Edition, which I wish I had, and finally the Green Label copy that was simply Mega Man 8. Mega Man 8 is fairly cheap, and I do know a Sega Saturn version of this game exists, but it is beyond expensive. I think the disc alone is like $150, which is freaking outrageous, but Mega Man has always been a fairly pricey game series, so who can blame me? But I ended up picking this up for fairly cheap. I think it was like 12 bucks or something like that. And I've pretty much had it with me ever since. I've played like halfway through this and I never ended up finishing it. I do want to get back to it at some point because the Mega Man games can be hit or miss depending on how long you actually deal with this. And for me, this could probably be done in about 8 game hours if I really put in the effort. So we'll see how that goes when I get the chance to play it the next time around. But yeah, Mega Man 8 is fairly cheap on the PlayStation, but god awfully expensive on the Sega Saturn. Next up is Mega Man X4. Now, it actually took me a little bit to actually find a black label copy of this game. I had 3 green labels. I bought 1 green label just to play it a little bit, and then quickly sold it. And then I quickly found a black label copy for I think it was $8. Not too bad. Again, this game also has a Sega Saturn version that was exclusive to North America, which is also very expensive, although not as much as Mega Man 8. I think the disc is like 75 bucks. But I do know X3 was also on the Sega Saturn in Europe, and that is also very expensive. We only got the Super Nintendo version, and that was the end of it. This one, I haven't actually completely finished. Again, it was like a halfway point when I stopped. Most of the time, it was due to the fact that I played one of the later X games on the PlayStation, which I'm actually coming up next. And because of that, I had a problem with the fact that you could not duck in this game, which was an annoying little thing because how could something so good as a ducking not exist in this game? And so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I ended up dying quite a number of times because I couldn't understand why. Eventually, I figured it out, played about halfway through, and I just stopped because I was doing other stuff at the time. So maybe I should give this game a shot when I get the chance, but we'll see how it goes. Just like Mega Man 8. Um, from what I remembered, I actually really enjoyed it, so I might actually do give it a chance. Next up is Mega Man 5, which is one of my oldest games in my entire collection in the form of a long runner. I bought this 7 years ago, about. And this was notable for me as it was the very first game that I basically bought it under the glass shelf. Other than before that, it was mostly game stores would usually have shelving stuff and just stack games along that, and then they would have a glass shelf where some of the more noteworthy games and some of the more expensive games end up being placed. This was the very first game I ever bought out of something like that, and what was actually an old PlayStation show it off stand. There was a TV in the center that did some of the old PlayStation ads, and everything else was inside the glass under it. So that was pretty cool to see. This, out of the PlayStation Mega Man games, this is the only one that I finished. Everything else was like halfway through. And the fact that I could duck in this game where I couldn't in 4, because I played this before 4, definitely kind of annoyed me, and that's kind of what dropped me from being able to finish X4. I did finish X5, and the whole system is actually fairly okay. I just honestly think there could have been a couple of things that could have been done better. And Overall, I actually had quite a bit of fun with this game, but um, I've played some better Mega Man games, honestly, but I really like this one, and that's really all that matters. And following that comes Mega Man X6, and as a lot of us know, X5 was supposed to be the original end of the series. However, the X series kept going despite the original creator's intentions, and so there was an alternate sideline going on with the Mega Man Zero games having to be altered. X6 is probably the most expensive of the three Mega Man X games because I've seen it considerably higher than some others. Not that it meant any different because X5 was actually what I spent on the most. That was 20 bucks and this was only 15. My disc is in fairly good shape, and I've only played this game for maybe half an hour, much less than the other ones. Definitely, actually, no, it wasn't really half an hour because that was the original test phase. I actually did put quite a bit of effort into this. Picked up Zero and put in about halfway through the game before I just stopped altogether for whatever reason. It is nice to have that I do own X6, but having to secure all the Reploids and everything has kind of been a pain in the neck, so that's probably what set me back, although I do want to give this game one more shot, just like I should with the other Mega Man games. Maybe I'll get to them at some point, but I've got a couple of things that are top priority on the list, and I'm definitely going to be doing them over the course of September. And to round up the Mega Man series, we've got Mega Man Legends. Now, I do know there's also Mega Man Legends 2 and The Misadventures of Tron Bonne. I've actually had numerous attempts to get Mega Man Legends 2, but I never ever bought it. And I've seen The Misadventures of Tron Bonne a couple times, but however, at the time that was like 200 bucks, which is already insane as it is. And now the thing has actually gotten so expensive, it basically crashed into the edge of the galaxy. Mega Man Legends, on the other hand, it took me a little bit to actually find a black label copy, and my condition is fairly okay. There's definitely better looking cases out there in my collection. I didn't play this one very much, maybe half an hour, and I actually remember this game mostly out of its Nintendo 64 counterpart called Mega Man 64, where it was just me goofing around in the city and not much else. So I never really put in all the effort to actually play this game. Considering it's also not really aged all that well, that's also pushed me back a little bit to a degree. It kind of sucks that Legends 3 did get canceled because I know a lot of people were in favor of that. But I don't know, man. Companies are companies. It's a mess that it got canceled, but hey, what can be done at this point? Next up is Breath of Fire 3, which is actually my first take into the Breath of Fire series. This is actually my second copy of the game. The first one I bought, which was very cheap, it was part of a huge lot of other games that included Grandia from the last episode. But for whatever reason, I couldn't get past a certain area very early in the game. So I looked for another copy, which I found fairly quickly, which was this one. Ended up buying it for 18 bucks and sold the previous copy I had. And I have completed this game twice, and I really enjoyed it. Out of everything I've actually seen and heard, out of all the games that are not in the mainstream and the Squaresoft lineup and whatnot, this is definitely one of the most preferred role-playing games to actually go with. It's actually it's a really fun experience. I really enjoyed this one, and it's definitely a game that I would like to play for the channel at some point when I get the chance. I'm actually thinking of doing the first game for the channel coming soon, so if you guys are interested in that, you might take a look, but otherwise, we'll just go ahead and roll with the punches. And subsequently, I also have Breath of Fire 4, too. This was actually the last physical copy of the Breath of Fire series I had to get. Actually, no, I made correct. That's on the that was Breath of Fire 2, because that one was a fucking pain in the ass. I originally bought this game as a disc alone for 20 bucks and played about an hour or so before I ended up selling it off because I wanted to find a complete copy. I did find multiple complete copies of this game, but it was either too expensive, most of the time it was over 40 bucks plus, and the disc was in very terrible shape. Eventually I found a really good one, paid 20 for it, and I still have it today. And this particular copy is the one that I actually used to finish the game. And unlike Breath of Fire 3, I've only finished this one once. And I definitely would like to go back and play this again because I like the art style, and it is a very good. Both 3 and 4 are excellent in their own right, and they're also they're moderately expensive. I'd say. I think between 35 and 50 is usually the market that I've seen for them. I'm not sure if that's changed um, in time, but definitely that was what was going for a very long time, and I'm not sure if it's changed or not. But both games are excellent, and I definitely recommend them. I do want to actually play these games on the channel when I get the chance, but right now, first comes first, and we'll go from there. And now we move on to the Konami games. And what better way to start off the collection with a black label copy of Castlevania Symphony tonight. Now, I have had a greatest hits label copy of this game, but I've since sold it off. I actually got this black label one fairly cheap and in fairly good shape. Only $40, which sounds a little high, but considering that this is often above $60 for a black label, that's a lot better than it really normally goes. What's unfortunate though is that a lot of people really favor this Castlevania game as the best. I've only played about halfway through it. Not sure why I didn't continue any farther, I never did. So I really do need to give this one a chance. Because a lot of people really recommend this game, and in my case I prefer the platformers, so maybe that's an offside in the form of Super Castlevania 4, but what I do know is that a lot of people love this game. I'd love to give it a chance because I enjoyed what I played out of it, and I never completely finished it, and that was the unfortunate part. So I am really glad I got this game, but it's also a game that I really absolutely need to give a chance because it's one of the best games on the PlayStation from what I've heard. So I gotta give it another shot when I get the chance. And alongside that, I have the other Castlevania game on PlayStation, and that's Castlevania Chronicles. Now, Castlevania Chronicles, the story with this one is I actually bought this game on the same day I bought Brave Fencer Musashi. It was also available on the same price, which was $35, which was actually fairly normal at the time. They were shipped on the same day, and they came to me on the same day. So they're both pretty much linked in their own way. The difference is the prices now have gotten pretty insane, and Castlevania Chronicles pretty much jumped up immediately after I got my own copy, upwards of $70 plus. So I'm really glad I got mine as soon as I did, because that was basically where it just spiked. Now, what Castlevania Chronicles is actually a remake of the arcade version of the original Castlevania, which is actually what was originally ported onto the NES. So, in this instance, you've got both the original arcade-style game, as well as an enhanced port of the original Castlevania arcade game, set for the PlayStation in its own way. So it's kind of like rival schools that I mentioned earlier, because one disc was an arcade, and the other was an enhanced Evolutions disc that was for the PlayStation. Except the difference here is that game took 2 discs, whereas this game took a single disc. And I'm really glad I got this game when I did, because I have seen only a single copy of this game in the wild since then, and I knew this was going to be a pain in the neck to get, so I actually pre-ordered it pretty much right on time. I'm really happy I got this game. It's definitely one of the treasures of my collection, and that's all that has to be said. Next up is Azure Dreams. Now, Azure Dreams is one where this game actually, it was one of the higher priced games that was just sitting around in the middle of nowhere in this one shop I usually went to. And it stayed for well over a year before I finally decided, you know what, I'll go ahead and take this. Because this was on my list, but the higher price tag than it should have been, it was definitely higher than retail at the point, kind of justified me wanting to get it until a long time later when no one else was getting it. So, Azure Dreams is actually a dungeon crawler, and one that I really enjoyed. I never did finish it, mostly because if you were killed at any point in the game, you lost all of your crap, and the only way you could actually get anywhere in order to get higher up in the tower was to have your monsters level up, because every time you started at level 1. This game is a pretty brutal RNG fest for a dungeon crawler. And of course, you basically had 2 different things going on, the dungeon crawler part and the town simulator section where you improve your town. This was a really fun game, and I know there's also a Game Boy Color version which was said to be easier than the PS1 version, but I'm not too certain about that. I really enjoyed this game, and I put in quite a bit of time to finish it despite being only halfway through the game technically. One thing that definitely irked me though was that the longer you ended up playing the game, the more blocks it would end up taking on your memory card. So this kind of pushed me a little bit once it went up to 3 blocks, because usually I try to have 1 block games, and that would be the end of it. This is definitely a really fun game, and nowadays it's about $50, so it is one of the more obscure and definitely one of the rarer Konami games, that is for certain. Definitely a lovable game though. Next is Vandal Hearts, which is our first multi-case game of this entire episode, and is also, just as a side note, both multi-cases are one-discers. That's because the manual's too huge, and that's the problem. So guess what? We have to have a multi-case just to get the manual to fit in, you fat ass. Anyway, Vandal Hearts was something that I never really got into until I actually only picked this up fairly recently. The game was, I've only played it for about 15 minutes or something like that. It's a strategy role-playing game, kind of like Final Fantasy Tactics, made by Konami, I guess. One thing that was definitely on my mind for quite a while, and I definitely wanted to get the game, I just never managed to actually play it. I did want to get Vandal Hearts 2, though, and since then I've never been able to pick it up. So I don't have a huge amount to say about it, but I did want to play it at some point in time. Maybe I might get the chance soon, but we'll see what happens. I'm definitely really interested in this game because I wanted it for so long, and the fact that I haven't had a chance to play it is kind of upsetting. Maybe I'll get the chance pretty soon. Next up is Sua Coding. Now, Sua Coding for me started off like Breath of Fire 4. I bought the disc alone for $20. The difference here between that game and this game was that I actually completed this game as a disc only. Actually, no. Almost all the way through. I was like, I'd say 90% through the game before I finally bit the dust because I basically just stopped playing and ended up selling the disc. And it took me a little while for me to actually find a complete copy of this game, but I eventually ended up doing so, and I went on to finally finish the game in the very same day that I bought it. Literally, 4 hours was all I needed to have to finish the freaking game, which is, I can't believe I was actually that close to finishing the game and never finished it, so that did irk me. I have not touched that game since then. This is definitely one that I want to play in the channel because this game is fantastic. This was also the only one that I didn't 100% complete the game, so I really need to give this one justice. This is definitely a game I really want to play on the channel, and was for a while one of the best role-playing games on the PlayStation until Final Fantasy VII came out. So, the Testament is fantastic, and it went on to make a really good series. Unfortunately, with it being gone now, the fate of it's uncertain. And that's unfortunate because the storyline and everything is actually quite excellent. And since we're talking Sua Coding, from this point on, it either gets really expensive or really freaking weird. And in this part, it's the former in the form of Sua Coding 2. Now, how did I get this little sucker? Well, I actually pre-ordered it online. One of the 9 games to do so, although this one was also the only one that came with something extra in the form of an official soundtrack, which I don't have with me currently. I might show that in an accessories video or some crap like that where I'm doing guides and whatnot. But I ended up buying that and the soundtrack, which actually balanced out the deal in a way. Not going to say how much I paid for this, but it was pretty much around the retail value at the time. Which, unfortunately, I bought this in August of 2014. A couple months later, the PSN version came out, which dropped it a little bit, but it has since came back up to its original roster. Now, I completed the game from start to finish and 100%ed the whole thing. The problem with me playing this one, however, was this particular disc has quite a bit of wear. And the wear actually screwed the data up in the form of the major battles. What would happen would be, the very first time I would play it, after about 2 minutes, the looping of the music would stop. and then eventually, like 2 or 3 minutes later, the game would crash. I would reset the system, and the loop would still stop, but I would be able to finish the major battle up to that point, and I would complete it. The 11th one, however, was the biggest pain in the ass because it was the only one where the save point was not immediately before the major battle. And as a result, I crashed every single time. So the only way I could actually finish that fight was to complete the entire major battle in less than 2 minutes, which I eventually pulled off. And that was not easy. And I eventually went on to finish the game, and I haven't touched it since then. This is definitely one that I will play on the channel, although I want to play the first game first, because having played the first game prior to this game, I had an idea of what this game was going to be like. The story was really good, I enjoyed it, and I would like to play the first game before I do the second game, mostly out of chronology reasons, and some bonus stuff, and that's a good thing too, because Sua Coding 2 has some really good stuff if you put Sua Coding's save file into it. Alright, let's start getting weird. Next game is Dragon Seeds. Now, this game is... I didn't understand what this game was until much later when I actually bought the game. This game is kind of like... It has a... It's hard to explain this game, honestly. The whole idea is you're a Dragon Master, which is like a Pokemon Master in a way. The game kind of plays like Pokemon in some sort of form. And the whole goal is just to be the best Dragon Master out there. So what you actually did was you created dragons using certain forms, and you basically trained them to gain a lot of power. However, if your dragon fell in battle, you had to start all the way from the beginning. Now, one of the cool things about this game here is that it used memory card data from specific PlayStation games, not any PlayStation game like it says. There are some specific games that do give out certain dragons. And one of the games in the next episode is actually one of them. So it is pretty neat to actually see this game. It's an unusual game, and I've played it for about 2 hours or something like that, because I didn't really want to... the whole permadeath thing kind of lured me out of it. Now, pricing this is very difficult, because for a long time, this game was actually very obscure. Sometimes I saw it as low as 35 to 40 bucks. Sometimes I saw it as high as 60 to 70 bucks. So gauging a price on this game has long been very difficult. I'm not sure if it's stabilized now, but it's definitely one of the more obscure games in my entire collection. That is for certain. Next game is Diablo. Yes, there is actually a console version of one of the Diablo games. Well, apart from 3, but that's beside the point. So Diablo actually had a specific 2-player PlayStation edition, and since I didn't have a friend to actually try out the multiplayer form, I pretty much just went on my own. The game plays pretty much like the PC version, except you have less controls. So getting around is alright, and the game actually plays pretty fine. And this is one where I only played for a couple hours, and that was the end of it, just to make sure everything was working and all that. My case is a little screwed up, but considering how rare this game is, it's not... I'll take anything at this point. This was also... I managed to get it fairly easy, about, I think it was 25 or 30 bucks, and usually I've seen this thing like 60 plus, regularly, even before I got my copy, so getting it as cheap as I got it was a lucky crapshoot. And that's really all I have to say about it. It is unusual to see this game actually exist on a different console, but because it's one of the more obscure games on the PlayStation, maybe that might just justify it. Next up is Shatter Tower, and this is probably the most obscure one in my entire collection, because this is a game where I see so few copies online, it's outrageous. And I didn't even know this game existed until about 3 weeks before I got this copy, which was in the wild, believe it or not. These guys just got lucky and managed a copy. I actually bought them when it was I couldn't meet them on Christmas Eve because I was doing something at the time, but when I went back, they actually offered their 25% off thing for the holidays and whatnot. So they knew me quite well, they allowed it to take effect, and I bought Shatter Tower off of them. This thing is easily one of the hardest PlayStation games in the entire library. It is basically the grandfather of Dark Souls in a way, because it's a first-person role-playing game, and you get your ass kicked. Kind of like how I did, because without knowing the controls right off the bat, you will fucking fall and die right within 10 seconds. And even in the fights, you've got durability problems, which is the least of your worries because every enemy beats that ever living hell out of you. And overall, it is a brutal masterpiece in its own right. I've played the game for maybe an hour just to make sure everything worked and all that, but half the time was actually getting my ass kicked because that's how brutal this game is. So, this is a game that's so obscure it's ridiculous and so hard that it might just be worth looking for just for the challenge. It's definitely a cool game, and I would love to give it a little better try. And the 17th and final game of the fourth set of my collection will be what actually segues us into the fifth and final section, because considering I wanted 17 games each, I thought long and hard on what to choose, and in the end I couldn't choose something, so I had to split a series in order to branch out the collection. And what I chose is a game called R-Types. Now, R-Types, I actually pre-ordered the other R-Type game on the PlayStation, which will be coming in the next episode. And when I finally got the order in, on April Fool's Day of all things, of all the things that showed up, R-Types was actually in the back counter and wasn't available for everyone else. It caught my attention immediately, and 2 days later I went ahead and snagged it from him. Now, R-Types is actually it's a port of the first R-Type and the second R-Type, and I've played both of them up until about the halfway point, and it's definitely, I've tried hard to actually try to beat these games, but shoot 'em ups are so brutal that it is difficult to pull this off. So I have tried to give the game a chance, and I am definitely going to give it a chance once again. I remember this game being like $30 around when I picked it up, but nowadays I'm not sure if that's increased or not. But what I do know is that this game is actually, it plays really well for a port, and it's also a very difficult game to find, but not as difficult as the other R-Type game that will be the start of the next episode. Alright then, 68 games down, 17 more to go. Next episode will be the fifth and final part of my collection, which will finally finish off the jewel cases, the number of multi-cases left, and then finally we'll get to the big boxes and long boxes. That will finally mark the end of my entire run. Then after that, we'll be going on the PS2, and that'll be the end of it. So, with that said, stay tuned for the final part, because there's going to be a lot of pricey stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next video.